this is a time that I was told that my husband was not going to live through the night. Welcome to my channel. My name is Yorros, and I have yet to do a story time here on my channel. My husband Daniel fell ill and he ended up being hospitalized for 3 months. He lost his renal function, so he ended up needing a kidney transplant, which he received this year, spoiler alert. I mean, it was just a really crazy time when my husband got sick back in 2021. He ended up being sedated for 6 weeks. He ended up having to go on a machine called ECMO, which was like literally the most type of advanced life support. I want to tell you the time that I received a phone call that my husband might not make it through the night. And I want to just premise this by saying that the reason I'm making this video is that I get comments all of the time because a lot of my videos, honestly, most of my videos are giving glory to God for the fact that my husband is like still alive today. But I get some really angry people telling me that, oh, you're giving glory to God, but like, what about the nurses and the doctors and the healthcare system and all that stuff? Like, what about those people? I speak some on my channel about the fact that I am a registered nurse, but I don't speak about it a whole lot. And it's pretty interesting because today, my husband and I actually spoke at church and we got to tell our story and share about our marriage and just give like marriage advice, which it's definitely gonna be a video coming as well. We've done some stuff, you know, where we share, like we have a podcast which is on a hiatus right now just because my husband Daniel has gone through some health struggles and he just wants to rest and he deserves it. So I'm letting him take a break from the podcast, but I'm sure we'll get back to it eventually. I just don't have a set date for that. But we got to share today at church about like marriage and our story and stuff like that. And it kept coming up like, oh, you're a registered nurse. So, people try to like wrap their heads around it because I had a pretty deep understanding of, I didn't know everything for sure, but I had like a deep understanding of like my husband's condition and like what he was going through and all of that. Every time people just get so mad at me that I gave God the glory, but I didn't thank the nurses and the doctors, I absolutely think the nurses and the doctor are a huge reason why Daniel is here today. Because without them and their expertise and like how much they poured their energy, their hearts, their souls into my husband, like he wouldn't be here. I believe that as well. But I want to share this story just so that we can all collectively understand that medicine is not always this exact science and there are limits to what doctors and healthcare staff can do. Okay, so I'm gonna share this story and hopefully that brings some clarity into that. Like I mentioned, my husband got sick in 2021. He had been struggling at home with for around 9 or 10 days, but Daniel was doing so-so. He was sleeping a lot though, which was starting to worry. Eventually he wakes up one morning around the 10th day after we had tested positive and he's like, I just don't feel good. And you're gonna have to excuse me. I'm like the kind of people that like, it's very hard for me to sit still. I don't have ADHD diagnosed or anything like that, but some days I wonder. No, for real, like that's a real thing. We don't wanna harp on ADHDers, but like I have a hard time sitting still. Finally, I take my husband to the hospital. I'm worried. I'm really, really worried because he woke up one morning and he looks at me and he's like, I'm struggling to breathe. My first thought as a registered nurse, who by the way had worked in a COVID unit from like the start of the pandemic to about December 2020. Well, I had a good amount of experience with COVID and I knew what COVID could do and I knew that I could put the body into a cytokine storm, which would cause inflammation in the lungs and clots in the body and just a host of very dangerous things for the body. So if anybody understood how bad this could get, listen, I did, okay? I studied up on COVID from like the time it came out because I was dealing with COVID while everybody got to stay home. Like us nurses were out here dealing with COVID and it was terrifying, okay? It was terrifying. So my husband was very overweight at the time. That is no secret. We also get like weird comments about his weight too. Like, yes, he was very overweight, a weight he should not have been in. And a little backstory to why he was at such a large weight. My husband lost his father to cancer, and food became a coping mechanism for him. For the 2.5-ish years since this all started, my husband has lost a total of 300 pounds. If you guys want me to do a more in-depth video on how my husband lost 300 pounds, I am more than happy to make one, because it was also a very traumatic story. Anyways, I go back to our story. So I dropped Daniel off at the hospital and I'm thinking he has pneumonia, and I am freaking out. I'm calling all my ex-coworkers, because I had stopped working in that COVID unit about 2 months before Daniel got sick. And so I was freaking out, and I started calling and calling in favors and saying, can you move him to the COVID unit where I know my coworkers will take good care of him and keep me updated and all these things. My ex-coworkers, something was wrong. So by the way, this was back when we had really strict COVID restrictions, which sucked, whatever, we're past that. But it was horrible what families had to go through when their loved ones were hospitalized. I just don't wish that on anybody. My husband, I went back to the car after like an hour or so. My mom's like, come over to our house, wait with us, don't be alone. You need to, relax and wait to get news. When this nurse finally picks up my phone calls, because it took so many phone calls to finally get someone to give me any news, and I get a message from one of my ex-coworkers saying, Daniel's no longer coming to our unit. He's being routed to the ICU. And he wasn't that bad. Like when I dropped him off, I don't even know how to express this, because people will say this too, like, oh, you're a COVID nurse. Like, how did you not know your husband was this sick? The nurse tells me he was intubated, which it's nurses try when there is time to let the patient be able to say goodbye to their loved one, because the reality is, if you're intubated, there's a possibility you might never be able to wake up, and your body might never be able to breathe on its own and things like that. So for that reason, it's usually if they try, it's not always the case, because obviously sometimes the emergency is that dire, but they weren't able to give me a chance to say goodbye. It turned out that his pneumonia wasn't horrific, but what had happened was that Daniel's kidneys had shut down, and it seemed like they had been shutting down for a while. And so his numbers were horrible, like his labs. And so he necessitated being intubated, because it couldn't lay him down flat to be put on a dialysis machine, which they had to start dialysis right away. So Daniel was intubated within the first few hours in the ER. And I remember I kept texting him like, are you okay? Please tell me you're okay. And he was intubated. And I'm sorry if I'm giving a lot of details. This is the kind of storyteller that I am. So feel free to just ask questions below. Like, I'm more than happy to answer anything, because this story has so many details. I just like sharing them all. I don't know. My family gets on to me all the time that I just share too many details, but I don't know. That's the kind of, when someone's telling me a story, I want every detail. So I just give it to you right off the bat. You're welcome. That moment that he got intubated, he just went downhill for the next 2 weeks. He kept getting worse and worse and worse, to the point that, yes, they're giving him dialysis 24/7. There's a way to do that. Daniel begins to go downhill for the next 2 weeks. We go from his kidneys being the major problem to now his lungs have worsened, and his pneumonia has worsened, and his lungs are getting inflamed. And it's getting to the point, for those of you who might not know, the way a ventilator works is that basically they put a tube down your throat, to your trachea, and so it's your windpipe, and so it basically blows air into your lungs and it breathes for you. However, if your lungs become too sick, it doesn't matter, because basically what your lungs do is that they take in the CO2 from the air and release that and keep the oxygen, right? And so that's what oxygenates your body. Wow. Your lungs can get so sick that that gas exchange is no longer happening. So yes, the machine is breathing for you. It's giving you 100% oxygen. It's giving you all the oxygen that it can. All the settings are as high as they can. But it gets to a point where the machine, your body's not receiving that oxygen. It's not letting go of the CO2. So it's like the ventilator's not keeping you alive anymore. It's breathing for you, but your lungs are not making the gas exchange and stuff. So I remember getting that news and just being like, if the ventilator can't keep him alive, give his lungs time to heal, what are we to do? So I'm giving the news that Daniel needs to go on a machine called ECMO. This machine is basically a machine that is the highest type of life support. It's used in heart and lung transplants. The heart, I'm not sure, but for sure lung transplants. And the machine basically pumps the oxygen directly into the bloodstream to keep your loved one alive. Basically, it's they put out a Hail Mary, and they say, hey, we have a patient in our hospital who needs to be put on this machine. That's kind of what they do. All doctors and all these other hospitals basically look at Daniel's case and decide if he's a candidate to be put on this machine called ECMO, which it can also be dubbed colloquially, in simple language, it's a artificial lung. Oh my goodness. Every hospital starts denying Daniel. At this point, we're getting down to like, it's been 2 weeks that he's been going downhill, and unless he gets put on this machine, he's not gonna make it. He is sedated. We'll say he's in a coma, which technically not really a coma, but like he was sedated. Like he was sleeping through all of this on a ventilator, receiving dialysis. You know, we start praying because this is not good. So we just start praying. Every hospital's denying him because he's so overweight. That was like such a high risk factor for him. Also, I mean, he's young, so he has that on his side. At this point, Daniel's 24. Today he's 26, but he's 24. They start denying him. I remember the day we got the call. Like I closed my eyes because I can still place myself there. I think about this day and I can still feel like what my body was feeling, just the stress. I mean, the heaviness on my shoulders, like I can still feel it on my body. And so my mom's a pastor, and so she stays home, and so she stood with me through all of this, and I'm so grateful for my mom. Our home that Daniel and I built together, like where I'm sitting right now, it's hard to be here. Like, at that point, it was just really hard to be here and see all the pictures of us hung on the wall. Like, it set me off. Like I was like, I need to get out of here. Like I can't be in this house. The grief was that intense. My mom and we have breakfast, and we're sitting there, and there's nothing I can do but wait and hope that a hospital takes him. And I don't know how much time Daniel has left before, you know, he's gone. All of a sudden, I get this phone call, and it's the hospital. And so I pick up. At that time, I would literally sleep with my phone like this on my chest, or like right here on my neck, and I would just fall asleep. At night, whenever I took nap, my phone was constantly with me or charging, and even if it was charging, it was like right there next to me. Like I never left my phone. I used to get like phone calls every hour, every few hours with updates, asking for permission for procedures and stuff like that for them to do on Daniel. So I was like, at that time, like constantly on the phone. And so my phone rings, and I just pick it up real quick, and it's a nurse. It's his nurse. And she tells me, hey, a hospital's gonna take him on and put him on ECMO. And I was like, what? And she's like, yes, they're gonna put him on ECMO. We're trying to get a helicopter for him. I gotta go. And she just, and she's gone. And I'm like sitting there in shock, like, is this happening? Like, is this happening? This is crazy. This is crazy. And so then I get another phone call, and this time it's the doctor. He wants to talk to me. I hear his voice so serious, and he says, ma'am, like, you need to understand something. And you know, my heart drops, because I'm like, what kind of news does he have for me? And he says, ma'am, I need you to understand that this hospital that has accepted to transfer him and take his case on and put him on ECMO, they will not move him to their hospital until you say with your mouth, until you verbalize, until you say that you understand this is a last ditch effort, but they cannot guarantee you that Daniel will make it. I was in shock. I mean, I knew the situation was bad, but this hospital is literally letting me know, I mean, he might not survive the transport. He might not survive the surgery to get put on the machine, which it is a surgery. Daniel, at the state he was at, literally his body was depleted of oxygen, and the ventilator was not really getting the adequate amount of oxygen into his body. I remember, by the way, sorry, I'll continue with the story because we're gonna get to a really emotional part. I said, sir, I understand. I just said, I understand. He tells me, but we can't find a helicopter for him because he needs something so specialized, and they're all in use right now. So if he has to go through by ambulance, it's gonna be like almost an hour drive, and it's just very dangerous. Oh my God, here we go. First of all, they wouldn't put him on the machine. Now they accept him. Now the transfer from one hospital to the other is gonna be risky because there's no helicopter available. They're gonna have to do it through land, and they're gonna have to do it through ambulance. Perfect. Great. The nurse tells me, you need to come right now. Just say goodbye to your husband. We don't know what's gonna happen. I go to see him in the hospital. I put all the stuff on. I put the mask, the shield, everything on, and I go in to see him. By the way, at this time, I was still testing positive. So, but they didn't need to know that. But I needed to go see my husband. Listen, I'm a Pentecostal, and I'm a Christian, and I believe in miracles, and I believe that God is real, and it was gonna take a miracle to save my husband. I go in the room, no one can come with me. My mom was only able to wait at the door, but she wasn't able to come in. And she gives me an anointing oil, a little jar of anointing oil. She's like, Carla, you're gonna anoint him and pray for him. The Bible says that we are to bring our sick to the elders and we are to pray and anoint them and pray for healing. I was gonna do that for my husband. Remember, I put a little bit of oil on my gloved hands and I lift the covers off of his feet. I was gonna anoint this man from his head to his toes and just pray for him and lay my hands on him. And I remember I lift, this is hard to relive, by the way, but I hope it blesses you. This is not for you to cry and stuff and like be but it's just like, in my videos, I really want people to know like, yo, this stuff is real. Like bad times are real, hard times are real. And I remember that I lift the blanket and I look at my husband's toes and they're purple. Dialysis messes with your circulation, but he was also oxygen depleted. So there comes a moment when your heart, your body is gonna start pulling blood supply and oxygen supply from your extremities, fingers, toes, and it's gonna pump it to your heart and your brain and like your really, really important organs, which fortunately you can survive without fingers, but you can't survive without a heart and a brain and your lung. He was getting close to crossing over to the other side. And so, and honestly, I know my way of presenting things, sometimes I'm gonna add humor. Honestly, this story would be really depressing. I mean, it is really, really depressing, but Daniel and I, we add humor to everything because some of the stuff is like, you have to laugh because it's like, did I really just go through this? Like, who would have thought that this would be our story? But if the Lord told us all the things that we would encounter in our lives, right? I say goodbye, I anoint him, I pray for him. I used to put I think it's Psalm 42. If I can find it, I'll put it right here. But I think it was Psalm 42 by Shane and Shane. I think I said that right. Beautiful song. To this day, I can't listen to it because it's really traumatic, but it is a gorgeous song. And I would play it and I would put Daniel's phone on top of his chest and let the song play. And who knows, if Daniel could even hear it, but I just needed to, I don't know, feel like I was doing something, and I was praying for him. And honestly, that's a big something that you can do for someone when you're going through something like this. Anyways, continue the story, Carla, continue the story. A few hours later, the ambulance comes and picks up Daniel. And I did not get an update for 4 hours. 4 hours. I say this a lot, but it was literally one of the hardest hours of my existence, okay? Of my existence. It was horrible. I had no idea my husband was alive. When I finally got a hold of someone, it was around 11 p.m. And the nurse tells me it took 3 hours to stabilize Daniel because the trip was so hard on his body. Again, he's still sedated and everything. I get a call at 3 in the morning that it's time for Daniel to have the surgery. They ended up not being able, because so by the way you're connected to ECMO is that they put a hose in your neck or your groin where you have major blood vessels, like big blood vessels. And the hoses, I got to see Daniel on this machine, y'all. Don't recommend seeing your loved one like this because it is traumatic. Basically, there was these, and I'm so sorry if this is triggering to anybody, like that's not my desire. It's just, I want to share our story. And I know a lot of you have gone through similar stories with loved ones in the ICU, and I want you not to feel alone. So if this is triggering to you, turn it off. You don't have to watch this to feel like an amazing Christian. So Daniel, they had to end up performing this surgery in his room because he was so unstable that he couldn't go down to the OR. This man was alive by the grace of God. And here's the part that I really want to get across. These nurses, these doctors, these healthcare professionals are amazing, amazing men and women. These are really highly trained professionals. God bless them. They are amazing because I know what it's like to be a nurse. I know the expertise that it takes. I know the effort that it takes, and it's hard and it's grueling work, and like you're working like these 12-hour shifts, and it's freaking rough. And so when people are like, oh, you don't care about the doctors and the nurses, like, yo, like for real, I'm a nurse. Like I know the hard work that it takes to keep someone alive. But we had gotten to the point where like we were reaching the limit of what science could do. What ends up happening is that they do the procedure right there in Daniel's room. And then for 3 days, y'all, usually just do like one ECMO site, and they end up having to do 3. So he had a hose, and I'm telling you, it looks like the size of like a garden hose. Like I'm trying to find something around me that looks like the size of these freaking hoses. Again, I got to see Daniel on this machine because he spent 3 weeks on it. 3 hoses, like garden hoses, like they were that big. And they would just take the blood out of his body, put it through this machine that literally had like 4 tanks of oxygen. I believe it was 4. And it would just put oxygen directly into his blood, pull out the CO2, basically do the function of the lungs outside of his body, pass the blood through a dialysis machine, and it would go then into his body. That's insane. Like, I just want you to understand, like, that's insane and very dangerous because his blood could clot. They could put clot back into his body. That can kill you. They could literally, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. So basically, for 3 days, this was our last resort. Keep that in mind, okay? This was our last resort. The machine stops working. It's not working. It's not oxygenating him, and basically they couldn't get it to flow fast enough is what they told me. This was our last resort. If this didn't work, he wasn't gonna make it. And so I get a phone call from the sweetest doctor, and she's like, Carla, right now, and at this time Daniel was still testing positive, so I couldn't, and since he got gone to a new hospital, I had never worked at that hospital. They didn't know me. I wasn't fit tested for their N95 masks, their respirators, so I wasn't allowed to go in and see him. And the other hospital I was, because I was fit tested for their mask, but in this hospital that he went to for ECMO, I wasn't allowed in. He was still testing positive. She calls me and she says, we're not letting any visitors in, and I just want you to understand that if they call you, you need to fight to get in. And at first I was like, what? And she's like, we only let family members come in when a patient's passing away. And I understood what she meant. She was telling me if I got a phone call that night because Daniel's condition was critical, and they kept adding ECMO sites and it still wasn't working, and they had kind of run out of options, so I thought. And so there was no other choice. It was like, if he doesn't make it through tonight, you just need to come and say goodbye. And I remember she started crying. Like, it's like they poured their heart and soul so much into Daniel. Like, I could feel that it was hard for her to have to tell me there's like nothing else we can do. That conversation was hard. And I remember my mom walked in the room when I hung up with the doctor, and she said, what did the doctor say? And I was like, Mom, same. Nothing's changed. I didn't tell anybody. And I don't know what possessed me to just not tell anybody how bad it was. Like, I usually call Daniel's mom like twice, 3, 4 times a day. I called her a lot. Poor woman, huh? She went through a lot too. I called her multiple times a day, and then just to give her updates on Daniel, and you know, I wanted her to like be really in the know, you know, out of respect. I just really wanted her to be in the know. I didn't call her. I didn't tell anyone that night Daniel might be passing away and we might get a phone call to rush there. I don't know if it was shock, faith. I think I just needed to process it for myself and decide what I was going to do, I guess. I felt so lonely. It was horrible. And I remember that just a few weeks prior, someone had preached at our church about the Shunammite woman. And for those of you who might not know her story, she was a woman that the prophet Elijah would like walk by her house and like pass by her town. And she goes to her husband, who like was a well-off man, and she tells him, hey, I want to build at the top of the house a room for the prophet to come and stay in whenever he's in town. And the husband says, okay. She built him this room, and I mean, it's like she created, you know, they were the representation, you know, God's presence, the prophets at this time. She creates like this room for the prophet. And basically one day he tells her, what do you want? Like basically like what can I do for you? I mean, you've done this for me. What can I do for you? And the woman says, nothing. You know, like, I built this room for you to glorify God. Like, I just did this for God. Elijah would travel with like a servant, and the servant says, hey, she doesn't have a son. Like, she's advanced in age and she doesn't have a son. And basically Elijah turns to her and prophesies, like, she didn't ask for this, though it was a desire of her heart. She didn't ask for this. The prophet says, you're gonna have a son by the time this time next year. The woman has a son, beautiful son, he grows up. And then one day this child is in the field with his father, and it says that he has like a really intense headache, and the father sends him home. When mom gets him, he dies in her arms. Very tragic. Her only son, her only descendant. By the way, sons were a huge blessing back in those days because they're the ones who inherited like everything and took care of their parents and all that. He dies in her arms, so you can imagine that's horrible. She tells no one and lays the child in the prophet's bed and basically goes to her servants like, get me a donkey, I'm gonna go see the prophet, right? We were talking about ancient times here. And her husband comes up to her, tells her, how's our son, what's going on? She's like, everything's fine, I'm just gonna go see the prophet. She tells no one. I mean, if you really think about it, it's crazy. I mean, she tells no one and goes to the prophet, and she's coming like at a haste, and basically tells her servant like, don't slow down for me, get to the prophet. The prophet's servant meets her and says, the prophet asks why you're here. She's like, I don't want to speak to you, I want to speak to the prophet. Prophet comes out and she says, I didn't ask you for a son, you prophesied him to me, I received a son and now he's dead. Basically, you better do something about it. It's like, whoa, who this lady thinks she is. But I freaking love her story because she's like, I didn't ask you for this, but now you better fix it. And it says the prophet goes to her home and he resuscitates, by the power of God, resuscitates her son. Someone had preached a sermon about that woman at our church while Daniel was sick. And I know God gave her that word. And I know she was preaching it right to me. And I'm sorry if I keep looking down. I'm trying to look at my time because I already know this video is like super long. So I'm sorry. If you're still here, thank you. Subscribe. I didn't tell no one because I didn't want anybody to say anything that would discourage me for praying for healing, despite the fact that it didn't look like it would happen, and despite the fact that that night was pretty critical. The doctor, before she hung up at me around 6 p.m. that night, is when she spoke to me. Like, I still remember so many details, and I'm sorry I'm giving you so many of them. And she tells me, that they're gonna try one more medication to relax Daniel's heart because they can't think of anything else that could be causing like the slow flow of the machine. I said, okay. Y'all, I slept with my phone gripped like close to my chest that entire night. I don't know if I could even get across to you the level of stress and the level of grief and the level of like prayer that I did that night. Because I thought everything I loved, I was gonna lose that night. But I trusted God and I said, they can't do anything else. Like, they don't know what else to do, Lord. It's in your hands. Literally, it was in God's hand. No one calls me at this point. I don't tell any. Like, I just can't bring myself to call and ask how Daniel is doing because I think I couldn't take one more bad news the next day. But at 10 p.m. the night before, by the way, before I move on, at 10 p.m. that night, we came to my house. We took out my dog, and then we went back to my mom's house. On the drive to my mom's house, I just feel the Spirit of God with me. Like, I just feel God with me. I don't know if you guys know just that feeling that you get like God's about to speak to me. We get to my mom's house and my sister was playing piano. There was a piano in the living room. And I remember that we start praying and I just remember I start screaming and my mom was so worried about me. I would have been too. She starts saying, Carla, calm down, calm down. And I just start screaming and I start screaming at God. And I start saying, I think at this point it was 2.5 weeks or so, but I said for like 2 weeks, I have been faithful, I have believed, I had posted and told people that I believe God's gonna do something to help us pray, that's all that we need prayer, and I have done everything you've asked of me. Like, I just went at it. And I felt like that Shunammite woman coming before the prophet and saying, I didn't ask you for this, you gave it to me, like, fix this. And I literally said, God, I believe and I trust in you, but I need one sign that my prayers are being heard. One sign that my prayers have come before you and that you're listening. Because it was very frustrating. For 2 weeks I prayed and it's like God was silent. It's like, are you listening? Like, are you literally listening to my prayers? And so I remember falling to the ground, just exhausted from all that screaming. And I remember my mom going, you need to calm down. You're gonna hurt yourself. Like, you need to calm down. Like, my mom and my sister were both like, whoa, she's lost her. Like, as I was so calm for the first couple of weeks, but it's like I hit my breaking point. We went to sleep. My mom took me to the couch, laid me down, put me to sleep because I was just beat. No one at this point, still, no one knows that I got horrible news that day and that this might be the day my husband doesn't make it. Like, this was a very critical night. They were gonna try one more medication. And then at this point, it's like there wasn't anything else left for them to do. I decide to muster up the courage because I did not get a phone call that entire night. I was like, well, is this a good thing? Like, I don't know. I was like, I need to call and I need to check on him. I couldn't bring myself to call. Not because I didn't love him, because I loved him. I couldn't bring myself to call. I'm like, I don't know. I was like, I literally cannot take the news. Like, it was just scary. So I call, and this very cheerful nurse picks up the phone. And she was like, hi, is this Carly, Daniel's husband or wife, sorry. And I was like, yes, how is he? She's like, oh, he's doing pretty good today. His oxygen is at 100%, which is amazing. And he's just kind of status quo. They're gonna, keep giving him antibiotics and all these. And I said, of course, he's still intubated and sedated and sleeping. So by, he's doing status quo, it's kind of like as horrible as it can get. He's there and he's there. So it's not like he was, away. So I was like, what do you mean his oxygen is 100%? She's like, well, I'm like, they told me last night it was bad. And she was like, oh, yes. Well, she's like, what happened was at 10 p.m. last night, I need you to catch this. At 10 p.m. last night, they started a new medication that relaxed Daniel's heart, essentially. And so it started pumping against the machine, or stopped pumping against the machine. The machine started flowing at the rate that they wanted it to, and his oxygen is at a good place. The machine is working. I was like, guys, I couldn't wrap my head around it. The exact time that I was praying for my husband, the machine worked. At the exact time that I was praying for my husband. Make it make sense. I'm not saying I did anything special or whatever, but I'm saying God heard my prayer. God heard my prayer. The exact time I was praying that night, they started the medication and it worked. He does miracles. He does the impossible. Listen, this night was a night that Daniel's health finally took a turn for the better. Today he's alive, thriving, and he actually started going to the gym this week. Like, he has the strength to go, or last week actually, and he's lifting weights and he's recovering, and he got his kidney transplant. And like, I was told like he could have been left at the other hospital, and like the doctor literally told me like you could leave him here and like we'll keep him comfortable while he passes, essentially. And that's when I told the doctor, no, like we're gonna try moving him to the other hospital. God is real. Like, he's real. I know I'm gonna have a few haters being like, oh, God this and God that. What about the doctors? Listen, science reached its limit. Like, they were out of options. And the last thing that they could possibly do, which was like a Hail Mary, worked. Husband's alive, doesn't have brain damage. He can talk and walk and be independent. Like, those are all things that shouldn't be true, but they are, because God did a miracle. If you're discouraged, I just want you to know, like, God still does miracle. God still does the impossible. Do with that information as you will. Anyways, God bless you guys. I post a lot of videos weekly, so stay around for like more. I want to do more of these, more story times. Y'all let me know if these are beneficial for you or bless your life in any way. But God bless you. Stay safe, and yeah, share your story. Bye.